Today, we're going to demystify the foundational mechanics of the digital images we stare at literally every single day. We'll explore exactly how screens trick our eyes into seeing these hyper-realistic worlds. Let's get right into it. Okay, check out this super crisp macro photograph of a human eye. It looks perfectly smooth, right? Totally organic. But if you zoom all the way down, way down, the truth is revealed. That organic image is actually built on a hidden, highly structured grid of tiny squares. It's kind of like a giant digital puzzle. So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the anatomy of a digital image, meet the mighty pixel, talk about resolution and image quality, warn you about the scaling trap, and finally look at bitmaps in the real world. All right, part 1, anatomy of a digital image, the foundation. The official term for this underlying structure is a bitmap graphic. A bitmap, which you might also hear called a raster image, is fundamentally just an image file made up of dots or pixels. You know, whether it's a digital photo you snapped on your phone, a scanned document, or even those high-quality graphics in a modern video game, at the end of the day, it's essentially just a massive digital mosaic. Now, comparing these two types of graphics highlights the difference perfectly. If you zoom in on the vector pineapple's leaf on the left, you see these smooth mathematical paths. But on the bitmap pineapple on the right, well, the structure is totally exposed. You can clearly see that bitmaps are strictly tied to a grid of square pixels. There are actually no real curves in a bitmap, just squares pretending to be a curve. Moving on to part 2, meet the mighty pixel, the indivisible core. So if we zoom in as close as humanly possible to that grid, we find the pixel. Fun fact, that's actually short for picture element. It's a tiny, solid-colored square. And this is it, folks. You cannot break an image down any further than this. It is literally the absolute, indivisible core of our digital visual world. Now the rule governing these squares is absolute. Looking at this grid of reds and grays, you'll notice a single pixel is entirely rigid. It can only ever display one single solid color at a time. No exceptions. A pixel absolutely cannot be half red and half blue. Think of it like a microscopic light bulb shining one very specific color. And naturally, the greater the number of these single-colored pixels you have, the more detailed your overall image can be. So when we put all this together, we get what you might call the bitmap equation. Take an assortment of single-colored pixels, mathematically lock them into a structured, rigid grid, and boom, the sum is a complete bitmap graphic, just like our detailed pineapple here. Once you really grasp how rigid this grid is, you realize that so much of what we see on our screens is just a really clever trick of the eye. Look at this gradient fade from black to white. To our human eyes, it looks smooth, right? A continuous blend. But look closely at that magnified yellow box. Smooth gradients are a total illusion. At the microscopic pixel level, that fade is achieved by simply stepping through incrementally lighter or darker solid squares. You start with black, step to a slightly lighter dark gray square, then a medium gray until you finally hit white. It's stepping stones, not a smooth slide. Okay, part 3, resolution and image quality, the system dynamics. Now that we're intimately familiar with the microscopic pixel, let's zoom back out and see how the sheer volume of these pixels impacts the final picture. This is where resolution comes in, which basically dictates our grid density. We measure this density in ppi, or pixels per inch. Just compare that low-density 1-inch square on the left to the high-density version on the right. The low-density one has fewer, larger pixels taking up that inch, while the high-density square crams in many, many more, much smaller pixels into that exact same space. And the visual impact of that density? It's staggering. Seriously, look at these two photos of the exact same mountain bike. On the left, we've got a resolution of just 10 ppi. That's only 10 pixels for every inch. It's a blocky, blurry mass, right? There just isn't enough data there to recreate the fine details of the spokes or the grass. But on the right, we've bumped that up to 300 ppi. 300 pixels packed into every single inch. It is crystal clear. The rule here is incredibly simple. More pixels equal more detail. Period. But as you know, in the world of digital media, everything has a cost. The system dynamics of bitmaps rely on this delicate three-way balancing act. Pushing up the resolution, the PPI, will absolutely dramatically increase your image quality. But because you're adding thousands or even millions of new data points to your grid, that higher resolution directly results in a much larger file size. So whether you're designing a website or developing the next hit game, Everything you do with a bitmap is a balancing act of maximizing quality while still keeping an efficient file size. Which brings us to part 4. Beware the scaling trap. The cardinal rule. This whole balancing act between size and resolution leads directly into a pretty dangerous pitfall that every digital designer absolutely must know how to avoid. Let's say you have an image that's 2 by 2 inches, and it looks fantastic, but you really need it to fill a space that's 4 by 4 inches. If you just grab the corners and stretch the physical size of that bitmap without actually adding new data to the grid, well, the computer just stretches the existing pixels to be larger. And as we learned, larger pixels mean lower density. You're actively lowering the PPI, completely ruining the overall image quality. It's going to look just like that blurry mountain bike we just saw. This brings us to the absolute golden rule of working with digital images. If you only take one practical design tip away from this entire explainer, let it be this. Never stretch a bitmap past its native pixel dimensions. Seriously, don't do it. If you need a larger image, you have to go back and capture or create a brand new image with a naturally higher pixel count. You just can't magically create detail out of thin air by pulling on the corners of a photo. Let's wrap things up with part 5, bitmaps in the real world, formats, and hardware. Now, you might not save files explicitly called bitmaps on your computer, but you interact with them constantly. Whether it's a JPEG photo from your phone, a transparent PNG on a website, a looping GIF, a BMP, TIFF, pict file, all of these incredibly common file types are really just different flavors of the exact same bitmap grids we've been talking about. They basically just use different compression algorithms to manage that file size issue we discussed earlier. To put this into a modern hardware perspective, just think about the gaming consoles sitting in your living room right now. The newest Xbox and PlayStation consoles boast about playing games at 8K resolution. Well, an 8K resolution grid is 7,680 pixels wide by 4,320 pixels tall. When you do the math on that, it means the console's processor has to instantly control over 33 million individual pixels at once. 33 million little solid-colored squares, updating their color 60 times a second just so you can play a game. The sheer processing power required to manage that grid is just mind-blowing. So, to bring it all together, here's your bitmap ecosystem cheat sheet. It starts right at the top with a pixel, our indivisible picture element. Those pixels are measured in PPI, which gives us our resolution. We know that a higher PPI gives us way better image quality, but it's going to cost us in larger file sizes. We also know that common formats like JPG and PNG are really just wrappers for these grids. And of course, our golden rule sits right at the bottom: never stretch a bitmap past its native dimensions. Which actually leads me to one final question for you. If every breathtaking digital photo you've ever loved and every hyper-realistic 8K world you've ever explored is ultimately just a clever illusion built from millions of rigid, single-colored squares, how much of our digital world is just a cleverly disguised grid? I'm going to leave you with that thought to ponder the next time you lean in and look really closely at a screen. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep learning.